Each year, the Australian dairy industry contributes $13 billion to the economy through farms, manufacturing and exports. 1.74 million dairy cows across 8 dairy regions produce over 9,700 million litres of milk a year. Since the early 1990s, the industry has been intensifying, utilising higher levels of inputs to produce more milk. Looking ahead to 2040, with projections for a warmer and more variable climate, this pathway may not be the most viable option. In order to explore this concept further, Dairy Australia, together with the Australian Government, the University of Melbourne, the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture and D-ARM Consulting, conducted research which set out to explore how 3 different dairy farm systems, located in central Gippsland, the Fleurieu Peninsula and northwestern Tasmania, might perform under predicted climate changes out to the year 2040. The 3 farms that were studied were seen as a representative dairy farm within their region. 2 of these farms, central Gippsland, Victoria, and the Fleurieu Peninsula, South Australia, were dryland dairy businesses. The 3rd in northwestern Tasmania was an irrigated dairy farm. The predicted climate for 2040 was biophysically modelled using high, medium and low climate change scenarios. The modelling looked at historical and predicted climate data and posed the question, how different is the climate likely to be and what current location would it most be like? Researchers also investigated how a changed climate would affect pasture growth in each location. Pasture growth underpins every dairying region, as this is the main feed source for cows. From the modelling, the case study farm in Gippsland was most likely to see an increase in temperature of 1.4 degrees Celsius and a 12% reduction of annual rainfall. This would make the predicted climate more like Cobden in southwest Victoria, but a bit warmer, or Talangatta in northeast Victoria, but with slightly less temperature extremes. For northwest Tasmania, temperatures will be more like southern Victoria, with rainfall very difficult to predict, whilst for South Australia, the predicted climate for the case study farm will be more like a location that is 40 kilometres to the north. Working groups made up of farmers and farm consultants guided the research in each region. Social researchers conducted interviews with dairy farmers and hosted focus groups to explore the social impacts on farm production from a changed climate. Most importantly, farmers interviewed were generally confident to adapt to incremental changes in climate based on their past experiences of adapting to variable seasons. In each case study, the existing farm system was tested in a 2040 high, medium and low climate change scenario. The scenarios were modelled using 3 development options: intensify, adapt and simplify. Each of the development options meant different things at the 3 case study locations. In general, the intensify options involved more cows, more purchased supplementary feed and capital investment in infrastructure. The adapt options involved changing the mix of resources without major capital investment. The simplify options generally involved less cows and less purchased supplementary feed. In Gippsland, the intensify option related to a higher stocking rate with additional supplementary feeding and split calving. The adapt option looked at fewer cows with greater milk production per cow and autumn calving, and the simplify option focused on a reduction in purchased inputs, optimised pasture use at a lower stocking rate and autumn calving. In South Australia, the intensify option focused on a fully ration-fed herd of larger cows calving year-round to target premiums for flat supply. It was assumed some land was sold to fund the development of the barn and purchase of machinery. The ADAPT option looked at a split calving herd with higher milk production per cow and more pasture consumed through additional grain feeding, development of a basic feed pad, and more nitrogen fertiliser. The Simplify option considered a smaller herd focused on optimising grazed pasture with a reduction in grain feeding and less purchased hay. The herd remained autumn calving. Finally, in Tasmania, the Intensify option centred on a higher stocking rate, 50 hectares additional irrigation with increased supplementary feeding, and infrastructure feed pad investment. The ADAPT option looked at 50 more cows, 50 hectares of additional irrigation, and off-farm adjustment for the wetter winter conditions. The Simplify option looked at fewer cows, with less purchased inputs, as well as optimised pasture use with a lower stocking rate and less labour inputs. Put simply, the research did not find a clear winner in the form of the most resilient farming system for the future. All of the development options had both positive and negative aspects. As a general observation, across all 3 case study locations, the intensification pathway provided a capacity to take advantage of favourable operating conditions in some years. For example, business operations could capitalise during periods of high milk prices, good seasons, and low feed prices. There was also a potential for an increase in employment opportunities, as these systems demand greater staff numbers. However, an intensified pathway created a potential for lock-in effects from investing in expensive infrastructure that requires the farm to operate in a certain way. There could be risks to personal and family health due to potentially high stress levels, and from an environmental perspective, there were greater effluent concentrations and output to manage. Most importantly, there was greater variability, high and lows, in profit-making over the mid to long term under variable climate conditions. In focusing on the adaptive pathway, there was flexibility in adjusting farm systems to maximise seasonal conditions. It generally involved increased per-cow production and appealed to some farmers participating in this project due to the opportunity to adjust tactically from season to season whilst avoiding a lock-in to an intensive system. The challenges were that it required sound decision-making and planning abilities to adjust operations seasonally to take advantage of conditions. Critically, there was a need for constant scanning of seasonal and global parameters. Finally, the Simplify pathway provided a less complex system, which could possibly lead to less stress on business managers, families and staff. There may be less labour required, a focus on optimising the use of homegrown feed, and there was also the possibility of stabilising annual profit-making over the mid to long term. However, this system reduced capacity to take advantage of favourable operating conditions such as high milk price and low feed costs. This option may not generate enough operating profit to service a high level of debt and would be considered to be a very low risk for a business with a medium to high equity level. Under all 3 development options, the profitability of the dairy farm businesses were negatively affected by the 2040 climate scenarios. In general, the adaptive or simplified farm production systems tested were considered to be realistic alternatives to the long-term trend of intensification. It isn't a clear-cut decision, as there are other factors which influence business performance. Firstly, milk payment systems may alter the attractiveness and returns of the different production systems, but milk price is likely to have a greater impact on business performance than climate change. Secondly, this research has shown that year-to-year climate variability is more of a challenge to dairy farm businesses than the effects of a predicted climate change out to 2040. Thirdly, the growing season for pastures will shift under these climate change scenarios, creating feed challenges. Dairy farm managers will need to continue to adapt their farm systems to manage risks presented by future climate. Finally, Skilled farm managers are essential to the future success of the dairy industry. Regardless of the development options, intensified, adaptive or simplified, considerable training and support for farmers and the industry will be required in the future so that we can manage the challenges posed by the changes to the industry, the changes to the seasons and the changes to the climate.